Hi, and welcome back to MTOP series. We are covering the text amendments and some proposals to rezonings. And this one is a little bit different. It is not a part of the city of Yes, but it definitely will have an effect on the community. This is changing the environmental review process and allowing developers to be able to build 25-story buildings without having to do an environmental review. So let's just go ahead and get right into it. Oh, my name is Alicia Boyd. and let's go ahead and get right into it. Okay, so what is an environmental review? An environmental review is a process in which every developer who wants to change the zoning, that means change how they want to build, make it, something higher, or something bulkier, they have to do an environmental review. It's the state law. And there are two forms that happen. There's an EAS, an environmental assessment statement, and then there's an EIS, for the environmental impact statement. So what happens is that the state, has made it very convenient for developers to be able to kind of weed out whether or not your development project is going to really have some negative effects on the environment or on the community. So they created a short form, and that's called the EAS. And it's about 4 pages long. You kind of check off boxes, and then that's it. It actually reads it out. So if your development is a very small development and there's no possibility of you going to do anything negative to the environment, you check off all the no's, and then that's the end of your review. However, if you have checked off a box and it says yes, or you happen to be next to a sensitive ecosystem, like a park or a garden, an official garden, not a private garden, but a public garden, a public park, not playgrounds, you might have to do another small study, like a shadow study or something like that. And then, again, if those results came back negative, then you don't have to do an EIS. So that's the short form. The second one is the EIS, and this is a much more in-depth analysis. There's a lot more studies involved. It's much more expensive. It's more lengthy. It's like a year, possibly a year and a half, depending upon the conversations that happen between the city agencies, where the city agencies will help to mitigate or reduce some of the negative environmental consequences. There might be some community benefits created with that, but that's really the meat of this. What the city is trying to do is not allow anyone who builds 25-story buildings or less to have no environmental review process. So they don't have to do the EAS and they don't have to do the EIS. And if you look on this, we show you a picture of a 25-story building. It's a big building. That's a tall building. These could be very drastic kinds of buildings in a community, and yet they won't have to do an environmental review. And that's the ask. That's what they're asking for. Of course, they're making the claim like, oh, the EAS is time consuming, it can cost up $100,000, which is absolutely untrue. The EAS is a very short form. It does not cost $100,000 to perform, unless you have a really huge project. And then you're going to have to do an EIS anyway if it's that major, So the excuse is not really. So they stated that there were several reasons why they came up with that decision. One was the studies. They claimed that they looked at 1,000 studies of development projects, and they determined that out of the 1,000, only one had to do an EIS. And so it making the EAS, a waste of time and energy. However, we asked to see the results of those studies because we wanted to know what they looked at. Like, hey, you're making the claim about this. Can we see the studies? And of course, they refused to give it to us. The community boards have asked for the studies. We've asked for the studies. We've foiled for the Freedom of Information, and still no studies. Now, some people who have claimed to have seen the studies says that 80% of the studies are really for 1 to 2 family development projects. And if that is the case, to move from a 1 to 2 story and use 80% of those findings and then justify 25 stories for 250 units is a far stretch, right? They're really skewing the study's findings. And if it's true, obviously the study is not very reliable. But again, we haven't been able to obtain it. The other thing that they said is, oh, well, there's been all these legal challenges and and all these legal challenges have failed, because communities will go to court when they believe that you violated the environmental laws. And that is one of the, things that a community can do. And it's not true. There have been successful litigation in the lower courts where they've challenged development that's below 25-story buildings that did not perform an EIS when they should have. And we'll just take an example from our own experience here. With Boyd versus Cornell Realty, the developer was trying to build a 19 story, 2 towers along the Book and Botanic Gardens that covered 3 blocks. They claimed that they didn't have to do an EIS because they were only building, 390 stories, apartments, 390 apartments. And so they avoided an EIS, and we filed the lawsuit because we had determined, based upon the evidence and even the building plans, that they were actually going to build 589 apartments and actually add an extra tower. So instead of 2, it was going to be 3. And that would have triggered an EIS, which they should have done. The developers hired Frank Carone, Eric Adams' chief of staff for a year, who probably came up with this idea. And we won. Judge Bodie agreed with us, looked at it, 3-year challenge, and said, yes, they should have done it. However, when we went to the second department, the appellate division, which has 100% record of overturning the lower court's decisions when it comes to challenges to development, where we challenged the environmental review process, we lost, right? The Judge Bodie had a 29-page decision. The second department had a 4-page decision. They made the claim, without providing any evidence, that Judge Bodie's numbers were incorrect. So what happened? Well, the zoning got reinstated, and the developer built 589 residential units with 3 towers instead of the one that was noted on the application. Now, one would think that, so you lost, so why you keep fighting these fights if you're going to keep losing? Because the fights are really important. Because what they do is they set precedent in the neighborhood that the city and the developers can't just come into a community and violate the law. So even though we might lose in the court, we actually win in the world. And again, we're going to use the same example. Because we had won that case in the lower court, another developer came along, wanted to build in the same area right across the street from Cornell Realty. He wanted to build a smaller building, a shorter building, but learning from Cornell's mistake, he decided to do an EIS, and the city decided to make sure that he does an EIS. And so that lawsuit was very impactful in being able to instill in the city that they must abide by the law. Even though we might have lost in the second department, there's still now a conscious effort by the city and developers not to violate the law and do an EIS. Well, that's about to all go away, because now you'll be able to build 25-story buildings and you won't be able to challenge it, because there would be no environmental requirement for a building of that height. And that's really the end goal for developers. And that is to do away with environmental reviews so that it weakens the community from being able to enforce environmental protections. Because if you don't have to do a review, then there's nothing that the community can do to protect itself environmentally. There's also another thing that they're about to do away with, and that's racial impact studies. A couple of years ago, the city council had passed a racial impact study requirement for all development to do. If these development projects are not classified as a type 2, they don't have to do it. And racial impact is basically when a luxury development is being proposed in the low to moderate income community and supposed to find out if that will be a driving force for gentrification and removal of the existing population. So if all of these buildings become type 2, they don't have to do a racial impact, and kind of makes that particular legislation mute. It weakens it, it almost makes it obsolete. So that's another issue that the city council has not addressed when it comes to these type 2 amendments that they're proposing. The other thing is, there's other tricks to the trade, and it's not just racial impacts. It's also just, think about if you live in a community that has 2 to 3 story buildings as the average height, like in my neighborhood, putting a 25-story building would not only, because I live in a community of color, drive gentrification and displacement, and the racial impact studies we couldn't do, but it also changes the character of a neighborhood, which is another negative environmental consequence that will not be considered. So you're really eroding the community's power to be able to decide what type of community they want to live in. But there's also other tricks to the trade, right? So not only will they, reduce the amount of, lowball the amount of apartments, they will not have to do a racial impact. They will not have to consider, the detriment, community, negative community environmental effects, such as sewage or the need to, have more police or schools. But what they could do, and they have known to do this, right, is buy several parcels of land, cut them up, create LLCs for them, get the rezoning for all these 25-story buildings that don't have to do an environmental review. And here comes, a developer buying all the parcels up, putting them together. Now you have a huge complex sitting in your community that should have had an environmental review, but did not, because, they're now exempt from. And we call this process, that kind of process, called the cumulative impacts. And even though there's supposed to be a violation of the law, and that the law has to consider cumulative impacts, we know that the city has not done so. And we can imagine, and it's hard to sit there and challenge each one of these rezonings because you only have 4 months to challenge a rezoning. And so all they have to do is wait 4 months, and once they get the zoning, they wait 4 months. So you can't challenge that one. And here comes another rezoning. They get that one, and then 4 months later, you can't challenge that. And so, and they know this. And so because the time is so short, you can't go back and say, oh, well, that one didn't do it, and now we have this one and this one. And this is how they will play this game. So what we're asking people to do is to get involved. You don't want to wait until you are completely powerless to do anything. These development projects can be in any neighborhood now without having to do environmental reviews. And this really would disempower the community to challenge these projects. And it also will prevent the community from being able to get, infrastructure support from these developments. They'll just be able to build, and they will, cause all kinds of damage in your community, and there would be nothing that you can do about it because they don't have to do an environmental review. So go to these meetings. There is a meeting happening this Monday, January 29th at 7 p.m. It's an information meeting that's being conducted by the Department of City Planning. Ask them for those studies, and say, I want to see those studies. I want to see those lawsuits that you claim, I want to see this. I want to see the evidence. Then there is the New York City Department of City Planning Commission's hearing that's happening on February the 7th at 10 a.m. So these are in person and via Zoom. So definitely consider doing that as well. And don't forget, these decisions have not been finalized. The city council person, your city council person has to vote on them. They're going to be voting on them. They're going to be doing their own hearing sometime in March or April, and then they have to vote on them. So really the power to stop these, these text amendments is in the hands of your city council. So that means it's in your hands. Right? Your city council is supposed to be representing you. So do consider that. And the last thing, who are we? Well, we're MTOP, the Movement to Protect the People. We're a grassroots organization that's been in existence for over a decade. We're located in the Crown Heights, Flatbush area. Our main focus is rezonings. We've done some successful challenges. We've protected the Booker Botanic Gardens with one of the largest development projects that were being planned. We are pro se litigants, so we filed lawsuits that have been successful, at least in the lower courts. And we made history when we stopped the district-wide rezoning. So we kind of know our stuff here in the community. But if you want to see more videos, please go to our website at www.mtop.org. That's MTOP.org, or call 718-703-3086, and we'll be happy to help you and discuss with you. And go and watch more videos. Definitely, these are nice videos. And I just want to thank you for showing up and listening to me, and I look forward to seeing you at the next video. Bye.